And God said to Abraham, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I shall tell you." Genesis 22:1.
A revered patriarch to Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, Abraham was perhaps the first human being to believe in the concept of one God. Yet how could Abraham consent to sacrifice his own son?
It's impossible for modern man to explain that story. It's impossible to deal with this.
The dramatic story of Abraham is shrouded in mysteries that spark controversy to this day. Abraham directly challenges God and pleads with him to save the sinful cities of Sodom and Gomorrah from fiery destruction. But why?
That Abraham, a total outsider, should plead with God for the lives of these people is absolutely amazing.
Who was this man who inspired one of the greatest spiritual revolutions of all time? Did Abraham really exist as a man of flesh and blood? Or is he a legendary figure created centuries later? These are but a few of the mysteries of the Bible. There could have been no more unlikely place for it to begin. Ur, a powerful, sophisticated pagan city, a kingdom which prospered roughly 2,000 years before the birth of Christ. According to tradition, it was here in Ur, in modern-day Iraq, near the banks of the Euphrates River, that a man called Abraham, the first patriarch of the Hebrew Bible, would spend his early years. Abraham, a visionary whose revolutionary spiritual quest to discover an invisible moral God would change Western civilization forever. In Abraham's time, Ur was surrounded by massive city walls. It boasted impressive temples, towers, and palaces, created by the sophisticated, resourceful people of Mesopotamia. Some scholars believe that the impressive ziggurat of Ur, recently restored, was the basis for the biblical Tower of Babel. To placate their fears of the unknown, the people of Ur, including Abraham's family, worshipped idols, gods of fertility, of love and war, fashioned from clay and stone. These fearsome deities were indifferent to human morality or conduct, so long as they were appeased with prayer and sacrifice.
The great mystery of Abraham's life, and in some ways one of the greatest mysteries of the Bible, is how did this man, in a world where people worshipped natural forces and the sun and the moon and idols, how did Abraham suddenly have a vision of a world created by and touched with the Spirit of God?
Traditional rabbinic stories, called the Midrash, tells us that Abraham's father was an idol maker. and that one day Abraham destroyed them. When his father asked who destroyed them, Abraham said the idols fought and destroyed each other. Abraham's father refused to believe him. He told his son that idols are just objects of clay with no powers of their own. Young Abraham's answer would reveal his revolutionary spiritual vision.
If the idols have no powers of their own, then why do you worship them?
That Abraham should destroy idols is symbolic of the fact that he alone, for reasons we can't possibly imagine, for reasons we'll never know, he alone said, this is not the way to go. He's listening to the different voice, to a voice of God who is beyond nature.
Ironically, some scholars believe that Abraham's monotheism, the belief in one God, was not an innovation, but a return to the original faith of the Bible.
The biblical view is that Abraham is not an innovator, because the biblical notion is that monotheism was the original religion of the human race, and that idolatry was a degeneration.
As the immortal biblical narrative begins, we meet Abram and Sarai among the idol worshippers of Ur. God will eventually change their names to the more widely known names of Abraham and Sarah, which we will use in our telling of the story. In Ur, the Bible records only that Abraham marries Sarah, who was unable to bear him children. Then, according to tradition, Abraham and Sarah set out with Terah, Abraham's father, and Lot, Abraham's nephew, starting a 1,000-mile journey across the desert, traveling toward the city of Haran in modern Turkey. Abraham was leaving Ur forever.
Abraham leaves Mesopotamia because his father and the family decided to migrate. It wasn't a decision of Abraham, and he received no revelation to leave. There is much speculation about it. Some people, some scholars think that it was part of a general migration of peoples from Mesopotamia westward.
At about the same time as Abraham sets out from Ur, across the world it is time for new beginnings. In the Great Lakes region of North America, spears are first designed out of copper. On the eastern coast of Japan, fish hooks made from animal bones are commonly used by fishermen. And in Hungary, skilled bronze workers create weapons, such as engraved axes and swords. But perhaps nowhere on earth was a more important drama being acted out for humanity than the trek of an obscure group of migrants braving 1,000 miles of sun-scorched desert.
And they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Genesis 11:3.
According to the Bible, Abraham would live in the village of Haran until he was an old man of 75. The advanced ages of Abraham and others mentioned in the Bible have long puzzled scholars.
The ages of the Bible really are a mystery and really are quite perplexing for people who want to take everything that is said in these stories very literally. And this just seems to be the storyteller's way of saying this happened in a period long ago when things were very different.
Tradition has it that it was not until Abraham was 75 that God spoke to him for the first time. It is perhaps one of the defining moments in human history.
Now the Lord said to Abraham, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. Genesis 12:2.
Some scholars believe this dramatic moment in the Bible when God spoke to Abraham is the beginning of true monotheism, the belief that only one God rules the universe. But was it?
It's hard to talk about Abraham as a monotheist. Abraham had an agreement, a covenant, with his one God, who is the Lord. Abraham didn't say, or believe, as far as we know, that there weren't other gods. All the evidence is that there were other gods for other people. And Abraham's God never insisted on exclusivity.
While experts disagree over whether Abraham was a true monotheist, the Bible does not indicate that he ever worshipped other gods. It only tells us that, led by his fervent faith in his one God, Abraham informs his family that they will be leaving their secure, familiar world behind. It must have tested their belief in him.
Abraham has the problem which many religious people have. He hears voices and he can't prove it. They must have thought he was a lunatic. You can look back and say what a great man this was. But it wouldn't have helped you if you'd been his neighbor back then in Canaan, and you have this man walking around listening to voices and doing strange things.
Despite the doubts of Abraham's wife and their relatives, they follow him. But strangely, God has not told Abraham his destination. Guided by the voice of a God only he can hear, Abraham leads his family away from the one world they have known. Guided only by his faith, Abraham leads his extended family to the land which will fulfill God's promise to him.
When they had come to the land of Canaan, Abraham passed through the land to the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, "To your descendants I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord, who had appeared to him. Genesis 12:7.
But Abraham's spiritual odyssey is far from over. No sooner does he reach the land which God has promised to him than he must leave for Egypt.
Now there was a famine in the land. So Abraham went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. Genesis 12:10.
When Abraham leads his family to Egypt, Sarah's beauty is quickly noticed. She is taken away from Abraham and placed in the Pharaoh's household. Foreshadowing the story of Moses' exodus from Egypt, God inflicts plagues on this Pharaoh. Sarah is allowed to rejoin Abraham, and together they return to their land. Soon afterward, Abraham travels to the small village of Bethel, about 10 miles north of Jerusalem. He and his nephew Lot separate to allow room for their herds, with Lot journeying into the Jordan Valley. Abraham is now called upon to serve a role unlike any he has assumed before. Abraham, who has been portrayed as a spiritual leader, is now depicted in the Bible as a warrior. He rescues his nephew Lot, who is being held captive by enemy kings. The cities of the kings are, strangely, said to be in an area that today is so desolate, human habitation seems almost impossible.
One of the most peculiar stories in Genesis about Abraham is Genesis 14, the war with the kings of the east. There are 5 cities of the plain, somewhere in the area of the Dead Sea, where we would not expect large urban sites to be.
As is often the case, archaeological discoveries seem to support the Bible's telling of the story.
Is there any archaeological or historical background for Genesis 14? Well, in recent years, perhaps by coincidence, 5 large late 3rd millennium cities have been found on the eastern shore of the Dead Sea.
After Abraham rescues his nephew Lot and triumphs in battle, he is visited by one of the most mysterious figures in the Bible, the priest-king Melchizedek.
And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed him and said, "Blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." And Abraham gave him 1/10 of everything. Genesis 14:20.
The brief, unexplained meeting between Abraham and this mysterious priest-king has long puzzled and intrigued scholars. For Christians, this righteous priest-king holds special significance.
Melchizedek became a mystical figure for Jewish and Christian mysticism, and became a figure of great importance as a precursor for Jesus, as a priest or a servant of God, whom they all revered as the first great non-Hebrew righteous man.
After Abraham's enigmatic meeting with Melchizedek, the focus of the Bible shifts to offer a startling glimpse of Abraham's intimate personal life.
Now Sarah, Abraham's wife, bore him no children. She had an Egyptian maid whose name was Hagar. And Sarah said to Abraham, "Behold now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go to my maid, it may be that I shall obtain children by her." And Abraham hearkened to the voice of Sarah. Genesis 16:2.
We've been focusing on Abraham. It is Sarah who determines the future of the Jewish people. And the relationship between Sarah and Hagar is really the determinative relationship in what happens in Abraham's household.
Hagar, Sarah's servant, conceives a child by Abraham. But a feud erupts between Sarah and the pregnant Hagar, which will foreshadow the conflict to come between 2 branches of Abraham's descendants, Jew and Muslim, which will erupt centuries later.
And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. And Sarah said to Abraham, "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my maid to your embrace, and when she saw she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt." Genesis 16:5.
The Bible relates that Hagar does give birth to a son, Ishmael. According to Muslim belief, he will become one of the founders of Islam. But in the Bible, it is Sarah and her offspring who will determine Abraham's future and assure the survival of the Jewish people.
I think that the Bible would have us understand that although Abraham brings the vision of God to this family, it's Sarah who tends it and will pass it on. And like many people of his kind, perhaps Abraham didn't have the practical wisdom and the everyday insight to make this vision come true. And it's Sarah who literally embodies the vision. And maybe she's saying to Abraham, "Look, I know you have this great idea, but trust me, this is the way to ensure its perpetuation."
Abraham and his extended family would eventually become the first Israelites, and Abraham the patriarch of the Jewish people.
Then Abraham fell on his face, and God said to him, "Behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. For I have made you the father of a multitude of nations." Genesis 17:5.
The sealing of the covenant between Abraham and God is one of the most profound moments in human history, a unique personal bond between a man and an all-powerful moral force. Abraham's covenant with God is a covenant of the flesh as well as the spirit that will leave its mark on the body of each male Jew.
"This is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. It shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. He that is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised." Genesis 17:12.
Circumcision was already widely practiced in the Middle East in Abraham's time as a ritual of passage to adulthood, or a premarital rite. But when Abraham circumcised himself at the age of 99, the ritual acquired a new spiritual meaning.
What is unique in terms of the Bible is not so much the physical circumcision itself, but rather that circumcision was considered to be a central part of the covenant.
One of the reasons that circumcision is a mark on the generative organ is that God says to Abraham, "You're going to be the head of a great nation. And I want you always to remember that it comes from you and your loins, and I want a mark of your commitment at the very place where this great nation will spring from."
According to the Bible, when God commands Abraham to seal his covenant through the circumcision of all male Jews, he also conveys his word to Sarah.
"As for your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations." Genesis 17:16.
Before Abraham and Sarah can know whether God's promise of a child will be fulfilled, Abraham faces God in one of the most astonishing confrontations in the Bible. For God confides to Abraham that he plans to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah for their wickedness.
Then Abraham drew near and said, "Wilt thou indeed destroy the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Wilt thou then destroy the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Shall not the judge of all the earth do right?" And the Lord said, "If I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake." Genesis 18:26.
When Abraham said to God, "Shall the judge of the world not himself do justly?" he was making a moral, legal point, which is without precedent in the history of the whole ancient world.
Abraham continues to bargain with God, from 50 righteous people down to 40, then 30, 20.
Then he said, "Suppose 10 are found there." He answered, "For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it." Genesis 18:32.
That Abraham, a total outsider, should plead with God for the lives of these people is absolutely amazing. It's an argument against hate mongers and bigots of all kinds, especially religious bigots, since in this instance they are people who are pagans of a totally different religion.
Unable to find even 10 righteous people, God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. According to the Bible, Abraham must witness the destruction of the cities with his own eyes. Today, the ruins at Bab-edrar and Numeira, located by the Dead Sea, are the sites where archaeologists believe the doomed cities of Sodom and Gomorrah once stood. Soon after the power of God is shown in all its destructive force, that same divine power creates miraculous new life.
The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Genesis 21:4.
The birth of Isaac will bring joy to the aged couple. But now that she has her own son, Sarah feels threatened by Hagar.
So she said to Abraham, "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son, Isaac." Genesis 21:10.
Sarah is very strong in the house. When she herself had a son, she was strong enough and smart enough to know that the firstborn son, Ishmael, would naturally take the birthright, but she also knew that God had promised it to her son. And therefore she was strong enough to ensure that the woman got thrown out with her son.
And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Be not displeased because of the lad and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for through Isaac shall your descendants be named."
The heartrending moment when Abraham sends the Egyptian slave Hagar and their son Ishmael into exile will sow the seeds of conflict between Jew and Muslim, which on occasion will bear bitter fruit in centuries to come. The words haunt us today as they have haunted the human imagination for thousands of years.
"Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I shall tell you." Genesis 22:1.
The Akedah, the binding of Isaac, though it is only some 22 verses, is in the Jewish tradition the most commented on incident in the entire Bible.
It's impossible for modern man to explain that story. It's impossible to deal with this. I can see this historically, but I can't feel it personally. It's too horrible.
One of the strange things is, although Isaac is the one who is going to be sacrificed, the focus is really on Abraham. Because the truth is, we feel it is harder in this case to be the sacrificer than to be the victim. Isaac is a figure of simple, almost pathetic trust. And Abraham is a tormented father who is torn between his love for his son and his duty to a God who has given him a terrible command.
Isaac carries the wood to the place of sacrifice, while Abraham carries the fire and the knife. Isaac then asks his father one of the most heart-rending questions in the entire Bible.
He said, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" And Abraham said, "God will provide the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." So they went both of them together. Genesis 22:8.
Abraham builds an altar and places his son Isaac on top of it.
Then Abraham put forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here am I." He said, "Do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Genesis 22:12.
We will never know what happened after that terrifying moment. Did Abraham and Isaac weep? Did father and son embrace through their tears? We know only that Isaac was spared.
And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. Genesis 22:13.
Perhaps no story in the Bible has inspired as great an outpouring of speculation as the binding of Isaac, from ancient times to our own.
The Protestant theologian Kierkegaard, at the beginning of his book Fear and Trembling, imagines a scene in which Abraham takes Isaac and binds him on the altar and says to him, "I hate you. I've always hated you. I can't stand you, and now is my chance to kill you, and now I'm going to do it." And he starts to kill him, and God stops him, just as he does in the Bible. And then Abraham unties Isaac and holds him, and crying says to him, "I thought it was better that you should hate me than that you should hate God."
But what is the meaning of the biblical story of the binding of Isaac? Some scholars believe it was a statement by the editors of the Bible 1,000 years after Abraham against a gruesome practice of their own time.
Child sacrifice was fairly common throughout the ancient Near East. And in fact, at Carthage in North Africa, a huge cemetery has been found with small urns containing the burned bones of infants, and the inscriptions accompanying these burials make it clear that parents sacrificed a child to one or another of the gods to bring them good fortune.
Scholars have sought to probe the seemingly baffling mystery of how any parent could sacrifice his own child.
As horrific as this might be to us, we can really see this as a very significant religious notion, where a person is coming and is saying to God, "God, you have given me that which is most valuable, namely a child. I am going to return it to you."
I think the editors wanted for us to believe that child sacrifice was never practiced, and yet the very critique of the prophets against it is proof of the fact that the practice was common. You don't complain about something unless it's a real problem.
Whatever the motive for the editors to set down the story of the binding of Isaac, its impact on all three great Western religions is immeasurable. Today, a mosque known as the Dome of the Rock, built in the 7th century in Jerusalem, enshrines the site on the mountaintop where the life and death drama is said to have taken place. However, according to the Islamic Holy Scripture, the Quran, it is Abraham's other son, Ishmael, who was bound and almost sacrificed on this very rock.
And the Quranic version, there's a general tendency to accept Ishmael to have been that son rather than Isaac. Isaac is accepted as a prophet, but the binding itself seems to have been Ishmael.
Christians believe that Mount Moriah was the site of Calvary, while the Jews consider this the location of their holiest shrine, Solomon's Temple. All three religions have found profound meaning in Abraham and Isaac's ordeal.
After the binding of Isaac is over, God and Abraham in the Bible never speak again. Perhaps after this, Abraham had nothing more to say to God. I did what you wanted, I fulfilled the mission, but now what else is there to say? And one commentator notes that after this story, Abraham and Isaac never speak again. After this, no matter how much Isaac understood that Abraham needed to do it, there was a sense in which they could never be as close again.
According to one old rabbinic tale, when the aged Sarah hears that her beloved son Isaac has been almost sacrificed by Abraham, the shock and horror of it are too much for her. In the Bible, we know only that soon after the binding of Isaac, Sarah finally dies. So it is that the aged Sarah, the first matriarch in the Hebrew Bible, passes away. And as Abraham weeps for her and seeks to find a final resting place for her, he takes what in the Bible is a momentous step. He buys a piece of land.
The very first piece of property in Israel that is actually recorded in the Bible as having changed hands with money and a deed is actually the burial ground for Sarah. And it will begin the sense of the children of Israel, of the sanctity of the land of Israel, to which they will return hundreds of years later after the slavery in Egypt.
These are the days of the years of Abraham's life, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. Genesis 25:8.
The Bible recounts how both of Abraham's sons, Isaac and Ishmael, bury him in the cave of Machpelah. Here in Hebron, 19 miles south of Jerusalem, the biblical Cave of the Patriarchs, also known as the Cave of the Machpelah, is enshrined in an ancient wall built by Herod the Great 2,000 years ago. According to tradition, after Sarah and Abraham, Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and Leah were also buried here. But archaeologists have been frustrated in their efforts to investigate.
Unfortunately, archaeologists have never been allowed to investigate the area. Like most holy places, it's off limits. Even if we were allowed to investigate the area systematically, the evidence that we would need would probably have long since have disappeared.
But even as some archaeologists debate whether Sarah and Abraham were buried at Machpelah, others ask a more far-reaching question. Did Abraham ever live, or is he a legend created much later?
It appears that these stories are composite stories put together over a long period of time, so it's impossible to place the patriarchs in any particular archaeological period because of the composite nature of the stories about them.
I know today the tendency is to assume that if it's mentioned in the Bible, then it's not historical. But that just happens to be a modern revisionist prejudice. And so I do think there was a person named Abraham.
Over the years, archaeologists have searched for evidence to verify the Bible's account of the Abraham story. The Bible tells us, for instance, that Abraham obtained the rights to use a well at Beersheba. This well, outside modern Beersheba, is traditionally known as Abraham's Well. However, with many other ancient wells nearby, archaeologists have been unable to link any one well with the biblical story. Continuing their search, archaeologists have sought evidence from other cultures of the time to verify the Abraham story. Especially useful have been tablets found by French archaeologists at Mari in Syria.
We have thousands of tablets from Mari. There are stories about the inheritance of property, the rights to wells and pastures, conflicts between urbanists and shepherds. So some parts of the stories about Abraham would seem to fit in the 18th century, to judge from these Mari texts.
Despite the riddle of Abraham's existence, because of the story of his spiritual quest, the world would never be the same.
There is nothing like the ethical monotheism of the Hebrew prophets anywhere in the ancient world. If you want to believe in the uniqueness of the Bible, this is a good point to begin. It is a fact. There is nothing like this anywhere else.
Every other country in the world, every other civilization had gods whom you had to feed, to sacrifice to them. Abraham had a God who gave him law and behavior. It's the introduction of a single moral law for king, for commoner, and even for God is a milestone in the history of the world.
Abraham's message is the same as Muhammad's, articulated at a different time to a different nation in a different language.
Abraham's spiritual revolution, his covenant with God, pioneered the bold new idea of monotheism.
How did one man stand out against all cultural and religious notions and accepted views of the time? That's a question to which there's no answer, but you might as well ask the same question about every innovator, every founder of a new religion, every revolutionary. We just have no answers. Those are abiding mysteries.
Abraham's spiritual odyssey inspired both Judaism and Christianity. Abraham is also a founder of Islam, for according to Muslim belief, Abraham and Ishmael helped build the Kaaba, the holy shrine in the center of the great mosque in Mecca. They believe that Abraham literally laid the foundation for what in Islam is the most sacred spot on earth.
Abraham developed the true faith, and it is the same faith that Muhammad eventually preached as part of the message that he received from God. So Abraham's role is absolutely one of a cornerstone in the Islamic tradition.
Perhaps the fact that all three of the West's great religions draw on the story of one man for inspiration holds out a promise that the three faiths will someday live in harmony together, as God promised to Abraham in the Bible.
By your descendants shall all the nations of the earth bless themselves, because you have obeyed my voice. Genesis 22:18.